There's going to be a lot of disparity in this video, mainly between the levels of emotionality in the songs I'm speaking about. Sheesh and Winterflower usually wouldn't belong in the same sentence or even the same book or video, if you will. But that's kind of exactly why we're here, to analyze how K-pop as a genre can cover the same topics in totally dissimilar ways. And I deliberated talking about breaking as a symbol that comes up in many songs, even many titles, but I found myself more fascinated with the apparent refusal to break, whether it's a stance brought about in a more passive manner or something the speaker is chronicling in desperate detail. This also, to some extent, leans into the idea of godliness or rejecting godliness entirely, as we will get into a bit later. I have 4 groupings of songs to talk about, the first being very earnest, but definitely varying levels of unabashed. I think Sheesh, obviously by Babymonster, has an interesting approach in determining how much can be said in how little space. This makes it sound like a traditional interpretation of poetry, but I think it goes without saying the song is modern and playful in a more modern way. The lineation is careful, the lines are short, but they play with interesting phrasing that elongates the lines. I think the idea of being a monster here is important, not just because it's referenced throughout the lyrics. It ends the intro just before the first verse opens, describing the speaker and subject hand in hand. It brings the speaker down to a more human level, but hands are also classic symbols of the uncanny if they are to be hurt or damaged in any way that makes them unfamiliar. And they do tease that we haven't seen anything yet. The first slant rhyme comes in the form of mono and slow-mo with treble, reaffirming the notion that something is in fact off here. They play with ideas of knowledge, with them reading the subject like a book, but they also acknowledge the subject also knows that. The pre-chorus is very dramatic, still elongating the lines, but with sentences that aren't so much terse as just bold. This leads into them repeating sheesh, and it does not sound like a big deal, but it takes up a lot of visual space, and bringing them back down to earth does speak to how earnest they are in what they are saying. They do remind us of their name amid the sea of sheesh, suggesting they are rooted in their own identity, regardless of other people's responses. I love the line about pouring into your cochlea. It suggests the communication is direct on another level, but also evokes other senses that they also present as a blessing, elevating the subject who has nothing to say but sheesh. They do focus a lot on sound, whether it be description or the actual sound of the words, which get very tactile. They also refer to their car as a ghost, which only reminds me of Shaylin Wright's book, Holding a Ghost. I know that's irrelevant. If I had to guess, this is related to this car being non-literal, and they're driving life through what is so abstract it could be ghostly means. They also elevate the speaker in a sense, referring to their action in their sleep, and therefore on an unconscious, inaccessible playing field, but they still describe them as burning it down, whereas the speaker is going beyond the sky like a godly figure, not human like the unconscious. Untouchable by Itzy is interesting down to the sentence structure. They say, can't stop me, nobody, and don't scare me, the mission. They're messing with the traditional order of things, putting the grammatical subject last like it can be tossed aside, and the focus is dispelling what clearly is not the case in their situation. And this is a decision they make, as in the first verse and pre-chorus, they speak on the me at the end as well. They keep returning to the same person or their eyes in personhood, and they establish a weight that they can later lighten. In the end, they state that they were untouchable before you or they even knew it. They're processing the situation as they speak, with parentheticals matching the speaker's thoughts and pace. However, their untouchable quality seems to embody further godliness to some extent. They refer to themselves as an everlasting form and their only vision, the latter interesting in particular. And vision itself is a motif throughout the verses, saying for the subject to keep their eyes on the speaker and try to cover said eyes. Meanwhile, the speaker does not need to look at a map, being so unbothered as a sort of small victory. The former calls out the difference between them, while the latter disregards the need for one of the most important senses, painting them as above other people who do naturally rely on it. The subject repeatedly attempts to disturb them in one way or another and fails, and they say they need to indefinitely run in order to reach the speaker, again implicating some element of godliness. Not to mention they really are in control from the very beginning, even counting down the start of the song with their short sentiment of confirmation this is going according to their plan. At the same time, any attempts to knock them down a peg are dismissed, leaving them unbothered. The godliness is naturally real with Gods by NewJeans. They describe a game ball covered in blood, and on the one hand, A game ball is a ball given to a player after some kind of victory, but I also think it refers to the world as is held by the god Atlas, and that is covered in blood. Everyone is apparently dropping like rainfall as well, seemingly portraying an entire cycle of violence. They do give the subject advice, but their words are a blend of dialogue and prosaic verse. They speak directly to the subject, but the yous turn to we's, and the stakes are so incredibly high while their actual tones, even their vocal tones, are pretty stable throughout the song. They absolutely turn nothing into something, going from laws to loud, their immortality never even in question, while the reasons get a chorus of focus. The pacing is interesting, though, with an aphora in the pre-chorus and chorus not presenting full thoughts, instead leading into the next section, establishing a sense of flow and power over it. However, the speaker starts talking about themselves and their own stake in the game. It's possible this is meant to be a shift in point of view and still concerns the subject, but regarding the thoughts in their own head. Either way, there's a sense of power in this shift, even when they portray themselves on their knees and praying. It's unclear if the entire song is them playing gods or becoming what they play, but there's an undeniable reality that fiction and reality are not entirely separate. That being said, while all of these songs are pretty different, they do all seem very earnest. The first two were rather unabashed, but Gods definitely makes their status seem earned through its sheer drama. I do want to cover a song that treats godliness as more so a part of a larger figurative concept, though, and that is Smartphone by Yena. It's a very short portion of the song, really just limited to the bridge, where she sifts through the conversation surrounding her and asserts that she is a princess and she is a goddess. It's different from the other songs we will talk about because those have more elements of nuance and aggression or somberness and solemnity, but it is literally on the page and it does show some of the ways a K-pop concept is built. Sserafim's portrayal of being unbreakable, as well as their rejection of godliness, is an interesting one to cover, in part because the specific portrayals I want to talk about are actually from the same mini-album. Antifragile is a literal label denying one's ability to break easily. While the label is literal, though, the song has a lot of figurative language, and it is, in my opinion, gorgeous. They speak of dying at the end of the pre-chorus, but they repeat the word die as if there's an abstract quality that needs to be compounded. They describe their ascent to the height of things very important, despite the title seeming more grounding than extravagant. They talk about what they itch for while talking about being on top of the world. They allow people to think what they think, not concerned with mental or physical constraints, all of which makes No Celestial seem very interesting. They're not perfect, they're not living a fantasy in what they describe as a box. Their wings fake torn off by themselves in real time, and speaking of the devil, obviously not literally, it's time for them to fall back to earth, to physically feel grounded without stipulations or rules. They're not fucking angels or fucking goddesses, and that is something you should embrace, having a real self in the real world without fear, which is a heavy sentiment if you really think about it, if you think of things in terms of reality. Winter Flower by Younha and RM is different. No Celestial is aggressive, but it's not anywhere near as intense and personal, striking, but like on an incredibly internal level. As someone who has had a literal hole in their stomach, this song reminds me of that experience. Like I said, it's somber, it's solemn, it hurts. This is a song with an aching atmosphere, with its visceral descriptions of the cold and the heavy hope for its end and something beyond it. The speaker can't help but question why they meet the subject, practically winter itself. They are of a different place and season, practically dripping in crimson and going by the names of flowers that yearn to bloom despite their harsh circumstances. Rather than break under pressure, they take hold of the idea of paradoxes, giving the winter a peace offering in branches and opening the time to what they call a new sky, seemingly a new world order. What they endured is still a part of them, though, hence why they are a winter flower, not something so far beyond it can't even be touched by that season. They hope that winter itself might be able to bloom in the same way they have. They don't want it to stumble, they want it to survive, and they urge it to hold on. But as harsh as winter is, we have to wonder if it could actually survive an eternity, or if it's meant to live on within this song, like Prosper in the Tempest occupies the minds and achieves his desires when individual minds allow him to do so. K-pop, even as an industry, definitely has a tendency to seek out people with and stories about resilience. The individual idol needs it in order to debut. The genre needs it to uphold the principles it typically strives to portray. As it leans into the notion of godliness, things get more complicated, but a lot of these principles hold true. There are, however, individual idols or groups who might be more critical of K-pop's apparent values as they persist. It's too big of an industry to be monolithic, but it's possible to identify common trends regarding their representation. It can be very superficial and conceptual, but there is also a level of genuine pain that they are able to convey.